and our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. Original unity. Reflecting on the words of Genesis, "It is not good for man to be alone," John Paul said that original solitude is a prelude, as it were, to the account of the creation of woman. In this account, the meaning of original solitude enters and becomes part of the meaning of original unity. Masculinity and femininity are, as it were, he said, two different incarnations. That is, two ways in which the same human being, created in the image of God, is a body. Perhaps, said John Paul, the analogy of sleep or torpor in Adam prior to the creation of Eve indicates not so much a passage from consciousness to subconsciousness or to the moment before creation, but in order that the solitary man may by God's creative initiative reemerge from that moment in his double unity as male and female. In any case, he says, there is no doubt that man falls into sleep with the desire of finding a being similar to himself. The figurative use of rib in the creation of Eve indicates the homogeneity of the whole truth of both. Woman is created on the basis of the same humanity as man. She is one who is ezer kenegdo, or complement, one who stands opposite in relationship. John Paul observed, when the first man exclaims at the sight of the woman, "She is flesh from my flesh and bone from my bones," he simply affirms the human identity of both. Original solitude, then, was an opening toward and waiting for what the Second Vatican Council would express as communio personarum, a community of persons. How characterize this community of persons? As mentioned earlier, John Paul, in developing the heart of theology of the body, stressed that the human person, expressed bodily as man or woman, is created precisely to be gift, and that the whole body person is destined for spousality. Reflecting on the two accounts of creation in this regard, the Holy Father said, and I quote, "In this way, the second account of creation could also prepare for understanding the Trinitarian concept of the image of God, even if image appears only in the first account. This is obviously not without significance for the theology of the body, but constitutes perhaps the deepest theological aspect of everything one can say about man. In the mystery of creation, on the basis of the original and constitutive solitude of his being, man has been endowed with a deep unity between what is, humanly and through the body, male in him, and what is equally humanly and through the body, female in him. On all this, right from the beginning, the blessings of fruitfulness descended, linked with human procreation." End of quote. Why the body then? To be gift destined for spousal union. Original nakedness. The third original that characterized human beings before the fall was nakedness without shame. The Holy Father began his reflection on original nakedness by saying, when we speak of original human experiences, we have to keep in mind not so much their distance in time, as rather their foundational significance. The important thing, therefore, is not that these things belong to man's prehistory, to his theological prehistory, but that they are always at the root of every human experience. The revelation of the body helps us to discover the extraordinary nature of all that is ordinary. The inclusion of original nakedness along with original solitude and original unity is not accidental, said John Paul. Rather, he maintained it is key to understanding the biblical sketch of anthropology fully and completely. Genesis 2:25 says, "Now both were naked, the man and his wife, but they did not feel shame." John Paul notes that the precision of the account indicates a state of consciousness and a reciprocal experience of body. Christ, in directing us to the beginning, establishes a continuity and connection between historical sinfulness and original innocence. Of the failure of the test of obedience at the tree of knowledge of good and evil, Genesis says simply, "Then the eyes of both were opened, and they realized that they were naked." John Paul said that the word "then" indicates a new moment and a new situation. The first humans failed the test of hearing the word in all its truth and accepting love according to the demands of the creative will. The new situation brought new content, new quality of experience of the body. Thus, shame is not only one of man's original experiences, but it is also a boundary experience. A radical change had occurred in the meaning of original nakedness of both man and woman before God and before one another. Shame became a threshold experience. How describe it? John Paul reflected, and I quote, "In the experience of shame, the human being experiences fear in the face of the second I. Thus, for example, woman before man. And this is substantially fear for one's own I. With shame, the human being manifests instinctively, as it were, the need for the affirmation and acceptance of this I according to its proper value. He experiences this at the same time within himself and toward the outside in the face of the other. One can thus say that shame is a complex experience in the sense that while distancing one human being from another, woman from man, as it were, it seeks at the same time their personal approach toward each other, creating a suitable basis and level for such an approach. Since shame is a boundary experience, it is necessary for us to ask, to what fullness of consciousness and experience, and in particular, to what fullness of understanding the meaning of the body, does the meaning of original nakedness correspond, about which Genesis 2:25 speaks? In the truth of being and reality, the first man and woman were given to one another precisely according to the truth of their bodies as naked. It is necessary to go beyond exterior perception to man's innermost being and to look there for the original innocence of knowing. The dimension of human interiority, said John Paul, must explain and measure the fullness of interpersonal communion, thanks to which the original couple did not feel shame. The term communication has become identified with particular media and associated products, the Pope noted. The deeper meaning concerns common union of subjects, persons in their ontological and essential concreteness. This profoundly involves the body, which manifests a human person and acts as intermediary, allowing persons from the beginning to communicate with one another. Merely naturalistic criteria fail here. Genesis 2:25 speaks about a fullness of interpersonal communication. They did not feel shame, said John Paul, and I quote, "An original depth in affirming what is inherent in the person, that is, what is visibly feminine and masculine, through which the personal intimacy of the reciprocal communication is constituted in all its radical simplicity and purity. To this fullness of exterior perception, expressed by physical nakedness, corresponds the interior fullness of the vision of man in God, that is, according to the measure of the image of God. According to this measure, man is truly naked. They were naked, even before becoming aware of it." End of quote. One of the foundation of the originals, solitude, union, and nakedness, on the foundation of the originals, the Holy Father developed his theology of the body. I sometimes describe his spiral development of thought and argument as his recipe style. He begins with basic ingredients and then integrates one ingredient after another, allowing preceding ones to rise to the surface again and again. Take 2 cups of Genesis, add 1 whole letter to the Ephesians, and blend in dollops of prophetic writings and a generous amount of Acts. All become integrated into a delectable wholeness. In audience number 23, the Holy Father spoke of the integral vision of humanity in regard to the biblical term knowledge. Adam knew his wife Eve. In terms of such knowing, it is really an entry into the mystery that is the other. And that mystery, when truthfully entered, evokes reverence. What one knows in mutual spousal body gift is not information, but communion in a mystery that only deepens. As Dr. Kenneth Schmidt noted, however, there is a 4th original, alas, also original sin. Although our rootedness is in the beginning, we live on the sin-conditioned side of the boundary named the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It is essential to ask, how do we find our rootedness in original solitude, union, and nakedness? Does each original correspond in a specific way to our capabilities for thinking, speaking, and bodily acting? Original solitude and today's cultures. Solitude involves our capacity to think, reflect, and name distinctions. Every person needs solitude, not loneliness, but a quiet depth in which to identify and relish one's unique identity, an unrepeatable call within the plan of God. Christ spent 40 days and nights in the desert prior to entering his public mission. He sought nights alone in prayer, and his friends knew his habit of withdrawing to the Garden of Gethsemane. Solitude invites openness to divine personal presence and to a right ordering of creatures in the hierarchy of being. There are aspects of creation that only reveal themselves in solitude, that require silence and patient waiting, a readiness for being surprised by God in the ordinariness of things. Pope Benedict XVI writes in his book on eschatology, and I quote, "There are some moments that should not pass away. What is glimpsed in them should never end. That it does end, and even more, that it is only experienced momentarily anyway, this is the real sadness of human experience." Close of quote. Sometimes solitude evokes ways of integrating and marking such precious moments. In Scripture, wells are often described as located in fields or places of solitude in the desert. From their quiet depths, refreshment is drawn for both humans and flocks. The well itself is like a faithful waiting presence, signifying the water of life. On the small prairie farm of my childhood, there was a well that provided water for both family needs and farm animals. Its sturdy pump was anchored in field stones that glaciers deposited there millennia ago when they slid from the far north and melted on the prairie plains. My mother had desired to give a chalice for my brother's ordination, but the cost stalled that dream during her lifetime. Years later, the simple home in which we were conceived and born burned totally one Thanksgiving night, years after my parents had retired from the farm. My brother retrieved large nails, burnt clean,